Okay. There are certain ways that human beings, intelligent human beings, have always determined reality, and they've always established like what reality is, what truth is, how we know, like that. Let's say vaccines work, and how we understand things of that nature. Okay, so we use a couple of our faculties to understand this. Okay, one of the first faculties we use is common sense. We use our physical senses and we use our intelligence. That's how we determine what truth and reality is as people. Okay, I know this is getting a little philosophical, but it's really important. Okay, and there's a certain reality to the world. Reality is not subjective. Okay, we are all here. That's not a fantasy. That's not lent to two different interpretations. Okay, there's one interpretation. We are all sitting here on this Zoom. That's just a reality. If somebody
We can't hear you for the past like 20 seconds.
even saying anything. Okay, so so like we have a certain reality. Okay, and that reality is the truth, and we use our common sense, we use our intelligence. That's how we determine what reality is. And in an election, in an American election, there's always fraud. There's always people that cheat. And there are always irregularities. That's just the facts. Okay, that always happens. Unfortunately, it happens, right? But it never happens on the scale where an entire election would be thrown off. Okay, there are like 150 million people that voted. So in order to throw the election, you would have to throw 8 to 9 million votes. Okay, that's not like a box load or 4 box loads of ballots. That's entire cities of people. Okay, so you can't like just get rid of entire cities of people. You can't fake this stuff unless there's a mass conspiracy on the size and scale of such magnitude that it would be impossible to keep something that big as a secret. Okay, it's just impossible. Okay, I'm like, okay, now let's say it did happen. Let's say on a mass scale, there was the greatest conspiracy fraud ever perpetrated in the history of the world. Okay, let's say that happened. Okay, so and then they got caught. The Trump people figured it out. Okay, now I see that, by the way, there's a couple of new people on the call. So I just want to point out, no one knows my political opinion. So no one here can tell you that if I'm pro-Trump or anti-Trump. Okay, so it has nothing to do with my personal political positions. Okay,
you've got to go to his secret Facebook account for that.
Right, it's so secret I don't even know about it. Okay, so so we don't know. We have no idea what the like. Okay, if you had like the Trump people figured this out, okay, and they figured out that there was a massive fraud. So the good thing is that in a democracy and in an American way, there are courts set up to be able to adjudicate this, and you just have to bring the evidence. If you bring the evidence, they're not secret courts, so everything is out in the open. So when you file your evidence, you file with the court and you show everybody, here's my evidence. So President Trump kept saying, we've got loads of evidence, tons of evidence. We're going to prove this. It's no problem. The only problem is that when they went to court, they couldn't prove it. There was no evidence. In not one court that might have been like biased and faulty, not 2 courts, 61 different courts. Okay. So now, in order for this conspiracy to take hold, you are talking about not just fraudulently putting forth 8 to 10 million fake votes, okay, or hiding 8 to 10 million Trump votes. What has to happen now is you have to have the courts put into play. Now you'll say, fine, they're all Democratic courts and they're all against Trump, except for the fact that many, if not most of these judges have been put forth by President Trump. They've been appointed. The president appoints these judges. And President Trump has appointed more judges than any other president that came before him, probably since George Washington, probably more than George Washington because there's more courts now. Okay, so now you have Republican justices. Okay, now like just to show you how ridiculous this is, the Republican entire claim against electing Joe Biden was that since the Republicans had a supermajority on the courts, the Democrats were going, if they got elected, they were going to stack the court, meaning they were going to expand the court so that they could appoint more Democrats to the court system. Okay, and therefore, the Republicans were saying their whole thesis during the campaign was the courts are in our favor. Then all of a sudden it comes time to go to court on the elections and the courts are not in their favor. Okay, that's called intellectual dishonesty. You can't have it both ways. You can't claim one way one time and then one way the other way. Okay, so the reality is that Joe Biden won the election. Now, even if you'll say that the conspiracy was so successful that they were able to get 10 million votes, they were able to get all the courts, 61 different court cases, and then get the Supreme Court to say there is so little evidence, we won't even hear this case, with 6 Republican judges and 3 Democrat judges, that they won't even look at it. And even if you say that's all, okay, fine. So even so, mass conspiracy, okay, and President Trump, the election was stolen from him. Now comes the next question. What do we do about it? Okay, we're Trumpers, and we were robbed of the election. So what do we do now? Right? What do we do? How do we react to such a thing, to such a travesty of justice? Okay, how do we do this? So now the question becomes, do we put the public, right, and the country ahead of our own needs? Now, thankfully, there are presidents that have done this before. There's been precedent for this. Okay, Richard Nixon, and I see Mr. Rudnick has a Kennedy sign behind him. Okay, chances are Kennedy did not win the election in 1960 against Richard Nixon. Okay, that's pretty much established that there was a lot of like going on in the 1960 election. Okay, but Richard Nixon made a decision, right or wrong, whether or not Nixon's allegations were true and his suspicions were true. He said it's not. You don't want to have a president that wins by a court case. Okay, Gerald Ford thought that he beat Jimmy Carter and could have won in a Supreme Court decision. Decided not to challenge in 1976 because he felt that wouldn't be right. Al Gore was looked upon as a little not so good for challenging George W. Bush in Florida in 2000. Okay, that wasn't looked upon as so kindly, and he lost. Okay, peaceful transfer of power is the basis for all of why the world looks to America. America is the only country that has a consistent, peaceful transfer of power throughout its entire history. Okay, even Israel, as great as Israel is, okay, we've had some pretty hairy elections in the past. Now, we've always had a peaceful transfer of power also, but we're pretty young. We're only 73 years old. Okay, America throughout its 244 years has always had a peaceful transfer of power, and all other countries can look to America for that and say that's amazing. Okay, now common sense tells you, that what happened in this last election, okay, is that Trump lost the election, President Trump lost the election, and now what happened on Wednesday, okay, now there were 300,000 people protesting. Okay, a very small minority of them became violent. But you have to be a complete liar and completely intellectually dishonest to say that President Trump did not lead those that were violent onto thinking that they had his support in what they did. Okay, I'm sorry. Like, we all hear the speeches. Okay, I wrote a whole long thing on this. I'm not going to go into it, but it's ridiculous to think that President Trump did not have some responsibility, if not all responsibility, for what went on Wednesday. It doesn't mean that those people are innocent and they can claim, well, I was just doing what I thought the president wanted me to do. Okay, no, you can't say that either. Okay, but President Trump instigated this crowd and they went ballistic. Now, this is my opinion here from this point on. I think that President Trump should be impeached because I think that every president from now on has to know you cannot do this. This is not acceptable behavior. You can't get up and tweet, fight. Okay, that's what he tweeted in the morning, fight. Okay, it's right there. It used to be there in his tweets, right? Then, right, because he's now been banned from Twitter if you really haven't been following the news, right? So this is an absolute travesty. People died. It was crazy. Capitol policemen died. Capitol policemen committed suicide. It's just insane. It's absolutely insane where America is right now. And don't think for a second it's over. Okay, if you know where to look, you will find that on January 16th, that's 5 days from now, okay, there are in all 50 capitals, there is supposed to be an armed demonstration, meaning last time we only came with flags, this time bring your rifle, okay, and go to the state capitol and try to, I don't know what they're planning, like how that's going to stop Joe Biden from taking over. And I can guarantee you, if they impeach President Trump, you're going to have armed conflict in all 50 states. It's going to be crazy, okay? I don't know what's going to be, okay? Thank God I'm in Israel. Good luck, okay? But that's, but that's really, it is real. Like I would like, stay home from school that day or until January 20th. It is like what people are planning is really, really terrifying, okay? It is not like, oh, we tried it on Wednesday and it didn't work, okay? So this is a shame. Now, what does this have to do with the USSR relationship? Okay, it's not easy. We did of all, like, no matter what you think of President Trump, you have to be just as intellectually dishonest to think that he was not good for Israel. The only way you can come up and say that President Trump wasn't good for Israel is if you define what's good for Israel is not what the Israeli people want. Meaning the way that I think, and this is because I learned from AIPAC, the way that I think, and there's logic to this, that what it means for a president to be supportive of Israel is that the president has to listen to what the democratically elected leaders of Israel want and support that. You can't have a president that says, I know better than the prime minister of what's best for Israel. Okay, many Americans, Jewish, non-Jewish, think that they know best what's better for Israel. And therefore, even if the Israeli people elect X and are in favor of policy X, policy Y is better, and we should force that on Israel. It's called being prescriptive, like prescriptive medicine. That's not a healthy way that we want the U.S.-Israel relationship to work. We do not want Congress to be telling Israel, listen, these are the policies that you have to put into place. That's not a positive way. That's a J Street way of thinking, where we know what's better for Israel, and therefore we must tell Israel what to do. Okay, so there's no president that has done as much to follow the prime minister of Israel's lead than President Trump. But it's not only that, President Trump did things that the Israelis would never have even thought to ask for because they would have thought it was impossible to get a yes. I'll give an example. Okay, Prime Minister Netanyahu today, if you ask him, will tell you that he told President Trump that it would be great if President Trump recognizes Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Bupkis, okay? Prime Minister Netanyahu said that to me 5 feet in front of my face, said that he was the one that told President Trump. Anyone that knows the backstory knows that we don't know which congressman, but some congressman called President Trump at 11 o'clock at night one night and said, Prime Minister Netanyahu is on the plane for Israel. You should have a surprise for him. And President Trump said, what kind of surprise could I give Netanyahu? Like a gift? He's like, you should recognize sovereignty over the Golan. Well, how does one do that? You just sign a piece of paper. All you got to do is sign a piece of paper? Yeah. Netanyahu got off the plane, and Ambassador Friedman was on the plane. Ambassador Friedman didn't even know about it. They both got off the plane, and President Trump said, hey, guess what we're going to do today? We're going to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan. And it was like, whoa, we never even asked for that, okay? That's how supportive President Trump was. Now, it's all great, except for the fact that now that President Trump looks like absolute scum to about 120 million Americans, okay? So now that's happened, Israel was President Trump's favorite project. So now we've got a problem because we're on the receiving end and associated with scum, which worked out great for us for 4 years. But now, right, if you want to reverse some of the Trump trends and say, okay, we got to go against what has been happening, Israel's on the losing end of things. So now Prime Minister Netanyahu has to really weave a fine line over the next couple of months of improving Israel's relationship with the new administration, while at the same time keeping up these great policies. It doesn't help Prime Minister Netanyahu's cause that he has another election coming up in March, which means that watch this complication that's going to be happening over the next 2 months. Okay, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in order to win re-election, has to get the Israeli right wing to vote for him. Okay, so I live in a town that is the definition of the Israeli right wing. Okay, half of my town votes for right-wing parties that mathematically have zero chance of making the threshold, meaning getting enough votes to win the Knesset seat. They cannot. It doesn't matter. If all of Israel stays home and only my town votes, they still will not receive enough votes. I've sat down with people from my town and with a piece of paper and a pen and a calculator and said, okay, here's the math. Explain to me why you're voting for a party that cannot make it. It can't. There's no way you can't show me this. And their answer is, we have faith in God. Because Baruch Hu. Now, I got to tell you, I also have faith in God. I also have faith in mathematics, which is also a system that God put into the world. Okay, so I feel that my faith is not lacking when I use math to explain how the world operates. I don't think that takes away from your faith in God. And the basic fact is that God has consistently failed them for the last 60 years that they've been voting for stupid parties that can't make it. Okay. Now, Bibi's whole way of being able to win the election is to convince enough of these people who are completely irrational to vote for him instead of one of these irrational parties. He's only got to convince about 20, 30,000 of these people. That's it. That swings him an extra 2-3 seats, and that's how he wins the election. But guess what? In order to get these people to vote for him, he's got to enact policies that are a complete anathema to everything that President-elect Biden stands for. So Bibi's going to have to be doing stuff to get these people happy, and anything he does to make those people happy will by definition upset the Biden administration. Okay? Now, everything he does to make the Biden administration happy will by definition upset these people and have him lose the election. The guy you don't want to be is Bibi Netanyahu, but also keep in mind that Bibi Netanyahu has won the last 8 elections. Now, 3 of them have happened in the last 2 months, but he's on a winning streak that no Israeli prime minister has ever been on at all. So that's really impressive. I really believe that Bibi Netanyahu is consistently 10 steps ahead of what everybody else is thinking. We're all sitting here strategizing for this election in March. I'm pretty convinced he's got the next 5 elections planned out and how he's going to win them step by step. By the way, what's Bibi's big secret of how he's going to win this election? You would never have guessed this. If you would have told me this, anybody would have told me this idea, I would have said it's the dumbest idea, and you would never have, no one would ever think that. What's his major plan here? How to win those extra 20, 30,000 votes? Who's he going to? The Arab parties. Okay, he's going, not parties, he's going to the Arabs. He's campaigning for Arab votes. These are the same people, by the way, who 3 elections ago, he got on television on election day and said, you got to get to the polls because the Arabs are bussing in and voting, meaning like those people we hate, those are the people who we have to defeat. Now he's going to their communities and he's saying, vote for me. Now, everyone's like, you're not going to get the Arab vote. He's not looking to get the entire Arab vote. He's got to get 20, 30,000 Arabs to be convinced that he can make their lives better by having them vote for him. That's insane, okay? That's an insane strategy, but it could work because it's Bibi, okay? Bibi went the millionth vaccine, went to an Arab in one of these towns, okay, the biggest Arab village in Israel, okay? And if anybody saw this, this is only happened in Israel. The guy he took the picture with that was the millionth vaccine happened to be a convicted murderer, okay, who had served 20 years in prison. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, of all the guys in the village, that's the guy you picked out. And when they asked the murderer, he said, I'm not really a murderer. You have to understand, I'm a thief. I went in to rob, and it happened to be there were 2 guys there I had to kill. But I'm not really a murderer. That was like on the side. I'm just a thief. I'm not that bad. You know, and you're like, holy cow, that guy's a free man walking around the country and can take a picture with Bibi Netanyahu, only in Israel. Okay, so, but that's who he's trying to get. He's trying to court those votes, and that could be a way how he could win the election is by getting 30,000 Arabs to vote for him. Okay, only in Israel this stuff happens. Okay, so that's That's what we're looking at. So that's why this stuff with President Trump affects Israel, because Prime Minister Netanyahu has to weave this line now. Okay, to answer Shlomi's question, and then I want to get to Ellie's questions that she emailed me before because they connect to what we were talking about last week. But Shlomi says if you look at some of the hires that the Biden administration is putting into place, they're very concerning. Okay, now what we say by concerning is there's no one. I know that every single right-wing Republican is going to tell you that everybody in the Biden administration, from Joe Biden all the way down to a new janitor that they're going to hire in the White House, is a secret Palestinian who hates Israel, wants to see it burnt down, and is a third cousin to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, where their families connect. Okay, that's what they're going to tell you. Okay, that's not, first of all, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are not related in any way, shape, or form. But there's also that's not true. Almost everybody that I've seen the Biden administration has hired so far loves Israel. They might love Israel differently than I love Israel, but they do love Israel, okay? And they want the best for Israel. They just have a different way of what's best for Israel. The key difference is the Iran deal, right? The Biden people believe fully that the safest thing for Israel to happen is if for America to get back into the Iran deal. Israel disagrees, and Israel says the safest thing that could happen to Israel is that there is no Iran deal, or if there's an Iran deal, it is much different than the one signed in 2015, okay? So the problem is that over the last 2 weeks, the Vice President Biden has hired almost the entire negotiating team from the 2015 Iran deal to go back and work for him in actual higher positions that they were in during the Obama administration. That's concerning because guess what's going to happen when these people come back to talk about the Iran deal? They're not going to sit there in the room and be like, you know what, guys, let's be honest, we were all wrong. Okay, we made a mistake and we've got to take a whole different approach this time. They're not going to do that. They're just going to repeat what they felt was the right thing to do in 2015, and they're going to do that again. So that's an issue for us. Okay, that is that is an issue, and the only way to balance that to make sure that we don't have this issue is if we're able to lobby our members of Congress to pressure the Biden administration not to give in on the Iran deal. That's on the next Iran deal. That's a huge challenge for us. And it is something, and Shlomi's correct, that we do have to be concerned with. Again, it doesn't mean that the Biden administration is anti-Israel, that they want to destroy Israel, that they want to give Iran the nuclear weapon. That's not what's happening here. But we do have to make sure that that same battle that we faced in 2015, which we lost, we don't lose again. We have to be smarter this time and figure out how to get better at it. Okay, any questions after that huge, long diatribe? Wow.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. So what's your first name? I'm sorry.
Jude. Sorry, I didn't put it there.
Fine.
My question is, you said something about how you want the president to be impeached for a second time to show other presidents going forward that you can't do this.
Right.
My kind of question is, hasn't he already shown other presidents that it can be done successfully? Because he was able to, get his fan base to go to the Capitol and storm it, basically. Hasn't he, set a precedent to where other presidents can think, if I take control of a certain amount of people, they can go do whatever I want?
Yeah, he's definitely shown that 100%, Jude. Well, now we got to show that if you do that, though, there are such serious consequences that you never want to do that again, right? Plenty of people cheat on their tests, and they get away with cheating on their tests, right? But the way that we make sure that somebody else doesn't cheat on their tests is that there's a serious enough consequence that they don't do it the next time, right? That's the whole idea of punishment, okay? So that's what, right? A punishment to one person acts as a deterrent to the next person, okay? So that's what we're trying to do, is to make sure that the next president that thinks, well, this will be a good idea, right, sits there and says, well, except for the fact that the last guy was impeached twice, and who knows what happened to him, because we've got like 8 more days of this craziness. Okay, so okay, that's okay. Any other questions? It's a little unbelievable to me that nobody. Oh, Rafi, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of been drowned out, some of it, but there was a congresswoman on Wednesday morning who said Hitler was right about this, and there was 6 million wasn't enough, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism in these rallies, as well as Israeli flags. And there has been a lot of people on the left who will only condemn this now because it's the right, including AOC Ilhan Omar, I think Rashida Tlaib as well. And you see some of that on the right as well. What is it with these people only taking responsibility when it's the other people?
So you have a problem in America today. First of all, just so you know, the congresswoman that quoted Hitler is actually a big friend of the Jewish people and a pro-Israel person. She's just an idiot, okay? And she said so. She came out, to her credit, she's like, listen, I'm just an idiot. Okay, that was a really stupid thing to do. I shouldn't have quoted Hitler. She quoted Hitler as his line on that whoever has the hearts of the youth will rule the next generation. And she prefaced it with Hitler was right about one thing. Let me tell you, and I teach oration besides teaching Torah and besides teaching Israel politics, I also teach oration. I teach how to speak. Okay, so let me give you one principle. There's two things you should never do when giving a speech, no matter what. It doesn't make a difference how well you think this will go over, and in your mind, how well you think this is a good idea. It's not. Don't ever do it. Number one, never compare anything to the Holocaust. It doesn't make a difference how bad it is. It doesn't make a difference how on the mark you think it is. Okay, don't compare it to the Holocaust for two reasons. One, it's not going to be as bad as the Holocaust, number one. And number two, it minimizes how bad the Holocaust it was. Okay, so don't ever compare anything to the Holocaust. Number two, no matter what small, tiny thing Hitler might have been right about or did well, never say Hitler was right about this or quote Hitler. Don't do it. Don't ever quote Hitler. No one will hear what you say after you say the words Hitler said. Then after that, it doesn't make a difference what you said. Okay? It just doesn't matter. The only thing people are going to hear is Hitler said. It doesn't matter. There's not going to be an excuse in the world that's going to justify or get anybody's attention after that. Okay? So don't ever use the words Hitler said. Once you hit those two words, then you know you've taken the wrong step. Okay? So those are two rules. So this congresswoman's crazy. To hit Rafi's point and to explain what he say is that nowadays what you have is a partisan divide where people are so intellectually dishonest that they will not admit when their side is doing something wrong, while fully admitting that while fully accusing the other side of the exact same thing their side is doing. Okay, so if there's a right-wing anti-Semite, they'll say there is no anti-Semitism on the right, and all the anti-Semitism is on the left. And the left will say there's no anti-Semitism on our side. There's anti-Semitism on both sides. It's just the way it is. Okay, there's people that hate Israel on both sides. That's just the way it is. But people are so intellectually dishonest nowadays that it does not matter. It's just the facts. It's just the way it is. So it's unfortunate, but people are just completely dishonest and hypocritical. Rebecca.
When the Biden administration comes in, are they able to undo the things Trump did, or they're just not going to continue doing more stuff?
So there's some things they can undo. Some things require an act of Congress to undo, and some things are just not worth the fight. Okay. So there's certain things. I'll give you an example, something that the Biden administration was not in favor of. Okay. The Biden administration is not in favor of, I'll show you. This bottle of wine is produced about 30 miles away from here in a place called Shiloh, and it's a product of Israel. Okay. It's made in the West Bank, though. So Mike Pompeo, I'm trying to find it, but this is an Israeli label, so it's not going to say it. But Mike Pompeo changed the policy of the United States, where this used to have to say made in the West Bank, and he said now it should say made in Israel. Okay, I don't know why I'm still holding it, because it's not a good example. Okay, so in any case, so Mike Pompeo changed that rule. Okay, the Biden administration would like to roll back that rule, but if they do so, they're not going to get any credit from anybody for doing it. They're just going to get a bunch of people screaming at them, why are you changing the policy? So when they sit down and they say, okay, what's the loss here of having that policy? What's the loss of changing the policy? It's just not worth it. So they could change it. It's just not worth it for them to do. Other policies, let's say aid to the Palestinians. Okay, so the Trump administration took away $25 million to the Palestinians that went to chemotherapy treatments to cancer-stricken Palestinians. And I'll sit there and say, what kind of sicko does that, right? Which a lot of people said. Why would President Trump take away? It's the Augustus Victoria Hospital in East Jerusalem, right across from Hebrew U, on Mount Scopus. Okay, they used to get $25 million from America for chemo treatments. It would pay for chemo treatments for Palestinians that could not afford chemo treatments. Okay, President Trump said, look, you're paying $300 million a year to Palestinian terrorists based on how many Jews they've killed. Don't tell me that you can't afford $25 million for cancer treatments. Stop paying the terrorists and pay for the cancer treatments, right? That was his point, right? Why should we cover that cost that you have funds available to pay terrorists, right? Okay, two sides of the good debate. The Biden administration takes the side that we shouldn't be denying people that are sick cancer treatments just because their leaders are corrupt and violent, right? So two sides of the argument. That's something the Biden administration is going to fight for because they want Palestinians to see that the Americans care about them. Because if the Americans don't care about them, then the Palestinians are not going to talk to the Americans, which they haven't done for 3 years since President Trump did that. Okay. Okay. Any other questions here? Okay, so let's get to Ellie's questions. Okay, Ellie texted me a bunch of questions, and she wants answers to them, and they're very good questions, and they have to deal with Israeli treatments of Palestinians. So before we get to Ellie's exact questions, I want to give a little background. Okay, we showed a map last time. But first of all, if you weren't here last time, don't worry. It's not like you can't understand what we're about to say. But we showed a map last time of Judea and Samaria, Yehuda v'Shomron, the West Bank. Okay, it's a small area on the Israeli map. Okay. That area was taken over in 1967 by Israel during the Six-Day War, okay, and Israel never made it a part of Israel. So I am standing in that area now. Hodiah, who's on this call, is also in that area now. Okay, Rafi, who also lives in Israel, and Geller, who lives in Israel, are not in that area. They're over what's called the Green Line, and they are in Israel proper. Okay, so Geller, Rafi, one side of the line, Hodiah and I on the other side of the line. Hodiah and I are Israeli citizens, but we do not live in Israel. We live in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Yehuda v'Shomron. Okay, that's where we live. Okay, so the question is like this: how are we Israeli citizens? Well, it's very simple. Any country can extend citizenship to anybody. If President Trump or anybody else, right? Sorry, my daughter Abigail is also on the call. She just texted me. I guess I don't exist. My daughter Abigail is also on the call. She's a student at Bar Ilan University, and she's also over the Green Line currently. Although some people might tell you that she lives in my house, I wouldn't know that for sure because she hasn't been here in 3 weeks. But anyway, so she'll blame Prime Minister Netanyahu because of the lockdown, but she could get here if she wanted to. Anyway, so she's also on the other side of the line right now. Okay, but. We are not Israel. So how are we citizens of Israel? Very simple. Any country can extend citizenship to whoever it wants. Okay, it can do whatever it wants. So if President Trump loves going on vacation to Acapulco in Mexico, he could say, we love Acapulco so much, we're going to give American citizenship to everybody in Acapulco. Now, all the Mexicans in Mexico City might say, what about us? That's not fair. And it doesn't matter because there's no such thing as fairness when it comes to who you give citizenship to. You're allowed to give citizenship to whoever you want to. Okay, it's your country. You can do whatever you want. So Israel made a decision that any Jews that live in Yehuda v'Shomron and Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, those are all three terms that refer to the same exact place. Okay, so anybody that lives there and is Jewish is going to get citizenship. Palestinians, meaning Arabs that live in this area, okay, do not get citizenship. Now you'd be like, whoa, that sounds like serious racism, right? Jews, yes. Arabs, no. That's horrible. Israel must hate Arabs, except for the fact that any Arab that lives on the side of the line that Rafi, Daniel, and where my daughter currently is, do get citizenship. How many Arab citizens are there? 2 million Arab citizens who have the exact same rights that all of us in Israel have, every Jew, okay? They have representation in the Knesset. And as we talked about before, even Bibi Netanyahu wants them to vote for him. Okay, so all of those Arabs. So it has nothing to do with Arabs versus Jews. It has to do with your nationality. Arabs that live in in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. Okay, all of those Arabs, they identify as Palestinians, and they want their own state. They do not want to be Israeli citizens. To the point where in 1993, they signed what's called the Oslo Accords, which is a series of agreements with Israel, which established a governing authority called the Palestinian Authority for the Palestinians in the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria, Yehuda v'Shomron, and they live under their governorship. They live under their rules. So Israelis over the Green Line in this area vote in Israeli elections. Palestinians vote in Palestinian elections. Now, just as a side note, we're going to step over here just for a side note. Okay, there's no such thing as Palestinian elections because Mahmoud Abbas is a dictator and a tyrant and won't allow elections for his people for the last 17 years. Side note, but if there were elections, Palestinians can vote in those elections. The fact that Palestinians aren't voting is not Israel's fault. That's the Palestinians' fault. The world will tell you it's apartheid and Palestinians don't get to vote. That's not true. They don't get to vote because they're not citizens of Israel. Okay, they're citizens of Palestine, this entity called Palestine, which means, Ellie, that they are under the governorship and have the rights of a Palestinian. Of course, they don't vote in Israeli elections, the same way that Mexicans don't vote in American elections because they're Mexicans. I mean, Mexicans that live in Mexico, obviously, because they're Mexicans and they're not Americans. So there's no reason why they'd vote in an American election. Okay, everybody understand? So that's why. Okay, now people will say Israel mistreats the Palestinians. Right? Now, here's the thing. The United Nations has a list, you can Google this, of human rights. Okay? It's rights that every single human being deserves. Okay? Those are the rights that every single human being deserves. That's what we consider. If you deny your people those rights, you are denying them human rights. And under international law, you can be brought to trial in a place called The Hague in the Netherlands. Okay? If you look through that list and compare that list to Palestinians and what they're able to do, you will find that they are not denied any human rights, but any human rights that they don't have are not denied to them, but they are denied by Israel, but they're denied to them by the Palestinian Authority. Okay? So, or people will make up rights that they'll say the Palestinians don't have, but they're not actual rights on the United Nations human rights list. I'll give you an example. Freedom of movement. They'll say Palestinians are not allowed to travel into Israel. True statement. Without a permit, they can't travel into Israel. The same way Canadians can't travel into America. Why not? Because they're Canadians. And in order to go to another country, you need a passport. Right, Jacqueline? Right? So you need a passport. Jacqueline's sitting in Toronto, as far as I can tell, right? So she's a Canadian. She can't. This is a huge international call, right? So Jacqueline cannot get into America because she's not American, right? Also, I can't go to Canada unless the Canadian authorities let me in as an American. Okay. I can't just drive across the border. That's what borders are for. Now, there are people that don't believe in borders and think that borders are a human construct that are social injustice and fine. Okay, that's not reality. Okay, maybe that's an ideal that we should strive for one day if you believe that, but that's not the reality. The reality is that every single country has borders and they're all careful about their borders and have to give permission for people that are not citizens to cross into their borders. Palestinians are not citizens of Israel, and therefore they can't cross over the line. So to say that Israel's denying them human rights by not allowing them to cross the line is bupkis. You made it up. That's not a human right. Okay? It's not a human right to be able to travel across borders without permission of the country that you want to travel into. Okay? So whenever anybody tells you that, right? When somebody says to you, Israel's denying human rights to Palestinians, just simply say to them, what human right is being denied? And how are they being denied that human right? And is that an actual human right? You will always come on the right side of that argument because Israel does not deny any human rights to Palestinians. In fact, any complaint that people have against Israel's treatment of Palestinians, you will see is not an actual violation of their human rights, okay? One of the things that I do, and Daniel's been on this tour with me, and I don't know if anybody else has, okay? One of the things that I can't do this during Corona, but I do this for thousands of students when it's not Corona time, is I take them around this area and show them with their own eyes so that they don't have to believe me. Right now, I'm just asking you to trust me. Show them all the complaints that people have against Israel's treatment of the Palestinians and show them, okay, let's see if it's true. Let's see if there's abuse at the checkpoints. Let's go sit at a checkpoint. We'll sit here for as long as you want. I call this movement crossing the line. Okay, you come with me and we cross the line and you get to see how Palestinians live. You get to see everything. And then I tell people on my tours that if you come on this trip, don't even trust me when you saw with your own eyes. Because maybe go on an anti-Israel trip. There are tons of anti-Israel tours and they're free. Okay, sometimes they ask for a suggested donation of like $10. Okay, but these are free trips. Go on the trips. These are trips designed to show you just how evil Israel is. So they're going to bring you to the places. They're going to show you the abuse. Okay, go on those trips and see if there's abuse. I go on those trips all the time. I have a great time on those trips. I love it. I don't argue. I don't sit there. I just go on the trips and I take notes, and then I go to see. And guess what? If I saw human rights abuses, my next stop after that trip would be to the Knesset members that I know about, and say, we've got to change this policy. We're the Jewish people. We're the moral people of the world. We're supposed to be the light out to the nations. How can we mistreat anybody? I would be the first guy advocating that things should be better for the Palestinians. But guess what? There's not. Now, that doesn't mean that Palestinians are walking around like all happy and joyful. They're not. Why? Because they don't have their own state. Why don't they have their own state? Because their leaders are corrupt and won't negotiate for their own state. They could have it. They could have had it so many times from 1948 all the way until now. Israel's offered them over and over and over and over offers of their own state, and they turn it down. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, let's go with Rebecca, and then I want to find out from Ellie if I've answered her questions. Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I may have heard you wrong, but did you say that that Palestinians aren't citizens because they live in Palestine, not Israel? But didn't you say Palestine doesn't exist?
They live in no, because they live outside of Israel. There
But
is no
don't-
Palestine. This area that we live in is not part of any country. It's disputed territory. Okay,
But
so the world
also-
calls it what?
I'm saying so then why would you be a citizen but not like your Palestinian neighbor?
Because Israel can extend citizenship to whoever it wants to. So Israel says that any Jews that live in this area, we're going to give them citizenship, right? Just like President Trump could give citizenship to anybody in Acapulco, right?
So-
It would seem like ludicrous for him to do that. There would have to be a reason why that would be positive. The reason why it's positive for Israel to have people here is because the army has to control it, and it's better for the army to control an area where its own citizens are, where there's not, if not. Okay, that's the
Wait,
idea.
so
That's a little complicated, but what?
How does that help the argument? Because when people say so, it's rude that they're not giving citizenship to the Palestinians.
The Palestinians don't want citizenship. There are 300,000 Palestinians right now living in East Jerusalem. Since Israel did take East Jerusalem and make it part of Israel in 1967, right? So those people, if we deny them citizenship, that would be what we would say is apartheid, whatever word you want to give it. So we offered the 300,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem citizenship. And guess what they said? No. They say no for two reasons. One, because it would be normalizing with Israel, which is something that Palestinian leadership won't allow them to do. You can't normalize with Israel because then you're accepting Israel's existence, right? So that's number one. That's they say they can't do. And number two, their imams, which are Muslim like clergy, like a Muslim like a rabbi or a priest, their imams maintain that it's against Islamic religion for them to take Israeli citizenship. Now, obviously, there's a debate in the matter because there's 2 million Arabs that are Israeli citizens, but the 300,000 Arabs that live in East Jerusalem are residents of Israel, but they are not citizens of Israel, right? So the Palestinians can't have it both ways. They can't say we want our own state, but we want to have Israeli citizenship at the same time, okay? You're seeing that, by the way, when it comes to the COVID vaccine. So you saw this huge thing that came out that Israel wasn't giving Palestinians the vaccine, right? Of course, Israel's not giving the Palestinians the vaccine. Why not? That's horrible. How could you only give the Jewish people the vaccine and not, right? So I got the vaccine. How come I got the vaccine and my Palestinian neighbors don't get the vaccine? So the answer is very simple. Under the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians asked for them to be in charge of all the healthcare of Palestinians. And in fact, they even wrote, giving out vaccines. We want to be the ones in charge. So then Israel said, okay, we've got vaccines for you. And they said, we don't want the Jewish vaccines. Okay, so go figure. Those are the things that make you smack your head up against the wall over and over and over again. Just like today, the Iranian Ayatollah came out today and said that it is completely against Islamic law to take vaccines from England or from the United States. Good luck, Iran. Okay, that's not going to do so well for you. You want to know why the Iranian people hate the Ayatollah? This is just going to add to their list. Okay, Ellie, have I answered your questions?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, great.
But I have one more question. Do Arabs that are citizens of Israel, like the ones who live in Israel, so you said they get are they allowed to live wherever they want in Israel?
In Israel, yeah. In Israel, they can live wherever they want.
Like they don't they can move to if they wanted to technically a Jewish in the middle of a very, very Jewish community.
So Israel has both for Arabs and for Jews. If you have under 60 families or something, it's a very small number. You can say you can make it like a gated community and say we only want religious Jews, or we only want non-religious Jews, or we only want, I don't know, I guess you could technically probably say like Ashkenazi Jews if you're like jerk enough, right? So you could say something like that, right? You could determine who you want. But once you get to a number big enough, then you cannot deny anybody to live there. In fact, even my community, it would be illegal for our community to say no Arabs should live here. We've had Arabs say we want to move in. And then we're like, okay, fine, but just understand we're a religious community. We close our roads on Shabbat. So Saturday you have to stay in your house. They're like, this is just stupid, right? So we're not going to move there, right? So
Are you allowed to do that though? Are you allowed to say like we close our roads?
That's a big debate. That's a big debate. And I'll tell you, just to give you like a little inside baseball in Israel. So we have a lot of families that have relatives that are not Shomer Shabbat, and they want to drive. So they'll come. So our community has a gate for security purposes. You can't just get into the community. So they'll go up to the gate and they'll say, this is like a horrible situation. They'll say at the gate, they'll say, we want to go visit our family. Let us in, right? So, well, you can't drive here on Shabbat. So, well, actually, legally, I can drive here on Shabbat. So open up the gate. And then they'll call the police, which requires 2 policemen now to violate Shabbat and drive over to have this fight and then open up the gate, which causes more desecration of Shabbat. It's one of these things. I don't envy the mayor of this town who has to deal with this garbage all the time, right? Which, just in case you don't know, is my wife. But this is like one of these things where you bang your head up against the wall over and over and over and over again. So, but technically, no, you can't do that. But first of all, most Arabs that move here have no idea if you can or can't do that. Second of all, even if the Arab was going to be the guy driving around, all his neighbors would hate him because the people in my community love telling their kids they can go around on the street on Shabbat and they don't have to worry about cars coming. So if you'd have like one car driving through, everybody would hate that guy. Yeah. So no Arab is like actually interested in living here. But yes, if an Arab that lived in the Galil, like in the Galilee, decided to move to a Jewish community in the Galilee, there would be no reason why he wouldn't be allowed to.
Okay.
Yeah, they have every rights of every single Israeli. By the way,
Healthcare and everything.
there's no rights that are denied them. But you should know, Israel has a serious racism problem. We have, just like America has a serious racism problem, we also have a racism problem, right? The basic fact is that people are racist, just a fact of life. It's not good at all. Don't think for a second I'm excusing it. And Israel has to do a lot of work. The good news is that there's a lot of companies and there's a lot of organizations that work on that and work on making sure that Israelis and Arabs get along and Arabs have just as much rights. But don't think that our racism just extends to Arabs. Our racism also extends to other Jews, right? Ethiopian Jews are discriminated against because they have different color skin than everybody. So, and as Jews, what better way can we welcome the ingathering of the exiles than by discriminating against the ones with darker skin, right? That's exactly what God intended for us when we got back to this country, right? So we have a lot of disgusting societal ills. For those that don't get it, I'm being very sarcastic. Okay, so we need to fix those problems. So yes, on paper, Arabs enjoy every single right that Jews enjoy. In reality, things get tough for them. My sister-in-law, who I'm very, very proud of, is a vice president of Microsoft here in Israel. And one of her jobs for Microsoft is to be a mentor to Arab women to make sure that they can get jobs in the high-tech world. It's something that we're all very proud of her for doing. So she works very hard on making sure that Arab women have just as much of a chance and opportunity as Israeli women do. I don't know why it's just women, just that's the job, but that they have just as much opportunity. So that's something that we're working on. But look, when you look at America at year 70, they were still enslaving their black people. So I don't feel so bad. I think we're doing pretty well.
But are there like successful, like wealthy Arabs who live in Israel?
Mm-hmm.
Like with nice houses and like wealthy Arabs.
Holy moly! You should see some of these houses. Yeah. In my neighborhood, by the way,
people portray it as they live in these rundown communities in like the middle of nowhere. Like,
no. If you drive around my neck of the woods, the only fancy cars you see belong to Palestinians. Forget about Arabs, Palestinians. Like, right? Odaya will tell you that also. If you see a fancy car driving around, there's very little chance that belongs to a Jew. Almost guaranteed that belongs to an Arab. Yeah, do very, very well. There are a lot of multimillionaires that live around here. There's also a lot of poor Arabs. But the poverty rate among Arabs and among
Mhm.
Jews in Israel is hovers around the same, like within 2 or 3 percentile of themselves. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, that was a very good class. Let's hope and really pray. I ask for those of you that pray and those of you that don't normally pray, so start praying that this week is a week of peace, that nothing happens, the transition to power all across the world is very peaceful, because last Monday night we ended this class not thinking that anything of consequence was going to happen before the last time we met. And let's hope that next Monday night we're right in that expectation. But I have to tell you, I really think we have to pray hard. Okay, I'm very, very worried about what this week will entail. Okay, have a great day, great night, everybody. Nice to meet the new people. I hope you come back next week.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.